There's one more thing that would be good to know before we go into the next module, and that is the subject of data streams. A stream is just a flow of data between a program and some input or output destination. It's how you're getting data into a command or out of a command. Now that might sound confusing right now, but it will make sense soon. There are 3 standard streams in Linux: standard input, standard output, and standard error. With standard input, the input usually comes from your keyboard, though it can come from another file or another command. With standard output, output normally goes to your terminal screen, but it can be redirected to a file or another command. For standard error, the message usually goes to your terminal screen, though it can be redirected as well. Let me give you a brief example of standard out and standard error. Let's go to our Ubuntu machine and open the terminal. Let's type in lstest.txt. Test.txt is a file that I've already created on my machine. When we run ls without any options, it's just going to tell us that it found a file in this location. But we see this output here, test.txt. The file exists. And this is the standard output of that command. And the standard output defaults to the terminal. Now let's do another command, ls no real file, and let's press enter, and this is an error message. As we talked about, standard error also defaults to the terminal. Now let's see both of these together. Let's run ls test.txt no real file. And here we see both standard out and standard error going to the same place by default, to the terminal screen. Now let's go ahead and clear our screen with the clear command. Now let's look at some examples of standard input. Earlier we've learned about the commands hostname and pwd. Let's run these. So first run hostname, and we can see the hostname, and now run pwd, and we can see our current working directory. These are commands that do not take standard in, they just do standard out. So we did not have to provide it with any input. Let's look at another command, and that is the command wc, which expects standard input. WC stands for word count. We'll learn more about this command later. It will provide us the number of lines, the number of words, and the number of characters in a file or input. So we can run WC and now press enter, and now you'll see that it's waiting, and it's waiting for input. And we're going to send it that input with our keyboard. So let's type in the words. This is an example sentence. Press enter, and then we need to tell it that it's at the end of the input. And the way we do that is to use the end of file command, which is Control D. So we press Control plus D, and now we can see the results. The number of lines, which is 1, the number of words, 5, and the number of characters. So that is the standard input. By default, it listens for you to type something. Now I have a file on my computer that we saw earlier, and it's test.txt. Let's cat this so we can see that it's just a simple sentence. Now let's do WC, the less than symbol, which is a redirect, and test.txt. This is redirecting standard input from the text file to the command. And we see the information here. There's 1 line, 5 words, and 23 characters. So if we do cat test.txt, we will see this line. This is just some text. 1 sentence, 5 words, and 23 characters, including spaces. Now, generally the way you would do this in reality, when using something like WC on a file, would be to run WC test.txt instead of using the redirect symbol that we used in the previous command. Let's press enter, and we can see the information again. 1 line, 5 words, and 23 characters. This is not really using standard input. It's using file input. The program opens the file itself using the file name that you provided as an argument and reads its content directly. This is file input, not standard in. When we did WC redirect test.txt, this uses the shell's redirection operator, the less than symbol, to take the contents of the file and feed them into WC's standard input stream. just like typing from the keyboard would. The key difference here is that with wc test.txt, wc pulls data from a file it opened, and with wc redirect test.txt, the shell pushes data into wc via standard input. Now let's do another example. Echo, apple, banana, cherry. Notice I put those in quotes. The pipe symbol, and wc-w. wc-w is using the -w option to tell it to give us the number of words only and not the lines and characters. Now remember, the pipe symbol takes the output of one command and pipes it into the input of another command. So here we're doing two things. Echo sends its standard output into the pipe instead of to the terminal screen. That is, into another command instead of the default terminal screen. And wc-w is taking its standard input from the pipe instead of from the keyboard. It's not reading from you directly, but from what came through the pipe, which is the output of the other command. So let's clear our screen. So we saw an example of standard output and standard error, and we saw the example of standard input. Now let's look at file descriptors. Linux identifies these streams with the following file descriptors. Standard in is 0, standard out is the number 1, and standard error is 2. Remember these numbers, as we'll use these to manipulate the streams, and it will all make sense soon. Let's see how to use these now. Let's go back to our earlier example of ls. Remember, the ls command, if ran inside a directory, will just list the contents of that directory. If we run ls on a specific file, it'll just tell us the file is there. So let's run ls text.txt space no real file. The test.txt exists and the no real file does not. So we see both the standard out and the standard error. Standard out is telling us that test.txt is there, and standard error is telling us that there's no such thing as no real file. But if we run ls text.txt space no real file space redirect space results.txt, now we see standard out went to a file because we redirected it. We can run cat results.txt and you can see it there. But standard error still went to the terminal screen. The redirect symbol takes 1 as its file descriptor by default. That is, it uses standard out, so it only redirects that stream. But if we run ls test.txt no real file and then use the number 2 redirect results.txt, we see the standard error is going to go to the file and standard out will go to the screen, because we've told it to send standard error to the file using the file descriptor number 2. Now let me give you an analogy of what we just did. Imagine that you're on a phone call with someone and there's a lot of background noise, other people talking. And if you had a way to filter out the other people that were talking and hear only the main speaker, that's sort of what we did here. So that example, ls text.txt no real file number 2 redirect results.txt, is something you will actually do to eliminate the noise with certain commands. Now another thing to do with standard error, instead of sending it to a file as we just did, is to do ls test.txt no real file 2 redirect /dev/null. And this means throw it away into what some call the bit bucket. /dev/null is a special device file in Linux that acts like a black hole for data. Anything sent to it is discarded and never stored or displayed. It's called the bit bucket because it's like throwing data into a bucket that has no bottom. So that's a way to redirect error if you're not interested in seeing it later on, but you want to clear up the noise. So notice we're using the number 2 to redirect standard error only to that file. Now there is a way to throw everything away, both standard error and standard output. Let's run this now. ls test.txt no real file redirect /dev/null, and then followed by 2 redirect $1. So that's telling it to not only send standard out, but to also send standard error to the same place as you're sending standard out. So this directs both of them to dev null. So remember that to redirect $1 is saying send standard error, number 2, to the same location as you sent standard output, which is number 1. Now, there's a shorthand way of doing this. We would type ls test.txt, no real file, ampersand, redirect, /dev/null. And that will do the very same thing of sending standard out and standard error to the bit bucket. Now I want to show you a visual so we can see this flow with standard in feeding into a programmer command, and that programmer command then having standard out and standard error. And you can see that here in this flow chart. Now here's another diagram showing the flow. You have standard in coming into a programmer command, and then the standard out or standard error coming out as a result. And both of those streams may be directed to the terminal, which will be the default, or to a file, or to another command through the pipe. Yet another diagram showing this a little differently. And here we see that the input can also come from different sources, keyboard by default, or from a pipe, or from a file. And then both standard out and standard error will go out either to a terminal, which is default, to a text file, and that file could be /dev/null as we've seen. I also want to show you this chart that has the standard streams on the left, standard in, standard out, and standard error, and has a description and some of the redirect options, and also the file descriptors, 0 for standard in, 1 for standard out, and 2 for standard error. So you can see each of those columns there. So if you're still a little bit confused about this and you want to understand this better, or just get a summary of what we've talked about, I encourage you to pause the video and check out this table, and hopefully it will help. Well, that is it for data streams, which is part of the command line basics. You're now ready to dive deeper into the terminal, and I hope you'll join us in the Module 2 videos as we look at file management using the acronym CREATION. I also want to invite you to like this video, subscribe, and also drop us a comment in the comment section. You can also follow me on X at sysvin the Linux Guide at Linux Launch. And if you want to support this channel or get more resources, visit my Etsy shop at linuxlaunch.etsy.com. And there you'll find a quiz for Module 1, a quick reference guide, and a full class PDF. I hope you'll join me in future videos, and I hope you'll find those resources helpful. Thank you.